just is very important. Educating your buyer is of colossal importance. At one time, back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, buyers, they knew everything. But the world has changed since 1 hour ago when we both got on this show.
Welcome to another episode of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. We have a colorful personality with us here today. Lew Weiss founded All Metals and Forge Group in 1972, just a couple of years after he graduated from college. He ran it and grew it for over 50 years until a successful exit early, just last year. Along the way, he did a lot of hard work. He tried some crazy things people thought were crazy things that didn't work. He tried some things that people thought were crazy that worked, and some of them worked incredibly well. And we're going to take a tour through his industrial sales career to learn what's changed and the role of distribution and what his transaction was like when he sold his business. But also, we're going to dig into some of what I would argue are some of the really forward-thinking decisions that he made along the way, becoming ISO registered before that was a thing, having a formal program for rapid quoting, the role of CRM. And we're going to also spend some time, importantly, digging into his broadcast career. So yes, he had a broadcast career on top of everything else. He founded Manufacturing Talk Radio in 2013, and he's hosted it since. Now, MTR has been on a brief hiatus while he had a transaction and working through some health issues, and it's about to ramp back up now. He asked Perplexity about it. Perplexity describes it as a podcast that covers a wide range of topics, including advanced technology, additive manufacturing, augmented reality, cloud, cybersecurity, 3D simulation, rapid prototyping, IIoT, big data analytics, and global supply chains. And it further says that each episode features guests who share in-depth information from their area of expertise, providing valuable insights for American manufacturers. So that's a good synopsis, and it's going to be the basis for, I think, a fascinating conversation. Please be sure, like, share, comment, subscribe. I'm sure you'll find something to chuckle about in this, something to scratch your head and make you really think about. Be sure to share those insights with people, and please join me in welcoming Lew. Thanks for joining me, Lew.
Thank you. One correction or addition.
Okay.
I forgot to tell you about Fun Factory, which was a children's mail order company where I was selling whoopee cushions and exploding pens.
I'm not sure that fits into the industrial kind of theme of the show.
It doesn't. But it was one of my great moments of dealing with children. Thank you.
There you go. All right. So I'm so happy to see the yellow jacket. For those that are familiar with MTR, you'll certainly recognize it as Lew's trademark uniform. But tell us, how did that start? What prompted that?
What, the yellow jacket?
Yeah.
Well, it started out because it's my favorite color.
Okay.
Number one. Number two, I was thinking in terms of the guys in the golf world. They wore the green jackets,
right.
And everybody knew them. They couldn't go anywhere without anybody recognizing them with the green jackets. So the yellow, I thought, was a little bit more outlandish, so I went with that. And along the way, and we started wearing it. I had a co-host at the time, and we were going to have another co-host, but the two of us looked like two canaries on a tree branch, and we found out that Crayola decided to retire Canary Yellow. And I said, that's absurd. So I sent a letter to the president of Crayola, and a lengthy letter about how could he do that? How are kids going to draw pictures of daisies and sunlight and so on? And much to my surprise, I didn't get a response.
Yeah, I mean, the two yellow jackets always reminded me kind of Wild World of Sports. So you're the Frank Gifford, I guess, of industrial manufacturing.
Right, exactly.
You told me a funny story one time. You went to a conference and your luggage was lost.
Yes.
And you wanted to run incognito. And then the next day, suddenly people realized again who you were.
Yeah. And the next morning, after the networking experience, they said, "How come you weren't there last night?" I said, "I spoke to you last night."
All right, let's wind back to 1972. What prompted you to start your company, and how did you pick industrial and how did you pick metals?
Well, 1972, I was 19, 20 years old. No, I was 28 years old, but that's when I went into business. But I went into the metals industry about 10 years earlier.
Okay.
And it was, out of high school, going to college at night, needed a job. So I went down to 42nd Street in Manhattan. I went to one of the myriad of employment agencies and said, I need a job. Well, we got a job in Brooklyn selling metals. And that was the beginning.
Got it.
And I took to it. I liked it. I liked selling. I thought it was kind of interesting. It was sort of science like. And I've been doing that since I'm 18 and now I'm 82. So,
Wow. So you own the company. You were in industrial sales, essentially as a distributor with your own company for more than 50 years.
yes,
Obviously, over your
yeah.
career, longer than that.
Industrial metals and forged products and so on.
All right. So over 5 decades, sales has changed. Can you categorize for us, kind of decade by decade, how you would say sales changed?
How I what?
How you would say that sales changed?
Oh, well, when I was going to college, I took up marketing, and that was really uh, where my area of interest lied.
Okay.
So I went to school, and marketing in 1970 is like stagecoach days in terms of transportation.
Right.
Uh, because I took a fascination to marketing, I implemented everything I learned. And when I then started my own business, I realized, oh, wait a minute, this thing that they're teaching us now in school really goes back 20 years behind us. What's happening right now? So I started doing my own research in terms of marketing, and I started reapplying new stuff, and at the same time also introducing stuff that I thought, hey, let me try this, let me
Right.
try that, and fortunately, it all worked. Um, Running a business for 5 decades, and only two bankruptcies. But the day I went bankrupt was the day of the new company, the new improved company,
Right.
and it worked. It worked very well. When when the internet came along, I said, "Wow, this
Yeah,
is."
so I wanted to ask you about that. Obviously, you've been rather avant-garde in some of your decisions.
Yeah.
How early did you recognize the internet, and how quickly did you recognize the potential to apply it to your business?
Um, I went to Washington, D.C., which is my hometown,
Okay.
and I use almost any excuse to go to Washington. So I read something in one of my researches that there are a couple of professors from, I think it was a Boston University, that was going to talk about something called the Wide World Web. Well, what the hell is the World Wide Web? And then I read and I did further research and I said, wait a minute, the World Wide Web has actually been here since the 60s. And it was the government that was using the World Wide Web as a global communication system.
Right.
But they kept it hush hush. And so I went. I went to the Washington Hotel, which was about 2 blocks from the White House. Uh, and everybody there used pen protectors in their shirt pockets,
Okay.
except me.
All right.
I use a gold pen and it doesn't leak. So
But you weren't dressed as a canary at the time.
I was not a canary at the time. No,
All right.
I was more like a hippie at the time. And I went to this, and it was a 2-day event. I literally had not a whole lot of understanding about what they were talking about. It just none of it made sense.
Right.
I came back and I spoke to a consultant friend of mine. Oh yeah, I know about the World Wide Web. I said, when were you going to effing tell me?
What
I
year
said,
was this?
this was wait, I'll tell you in a minute. It was in the 90s.
Okay.
I said, when were you going to tell me about this? He said, why? I said, this is going to be the biggest thing since sliced bread. Old expression. And it was less than a year we had our first website up and running.
So up to
And
that point, I assume you've been relying on Thomas Register and Yellow Pages, basically.
well, I was already involved in that. Yes,
Right.
yes. At one point, at that point, I think we were the fourth or fifth largest advertiser in Thomas Register,
Really?
and they didn't know about the internet at that point. And I
Right.
spoke to the salesperson who I dealt with for 40 years, and I said, "What's the story?" He said, What is that?" I said, "I don't know. You're the marketing guy. Find out."
Right.
And they then got involved very early on, and we sort of partnered with Thomas Register for a number of years.
I see.
To this day, All Metals and Forge Group is still a large advertiser with Thomas. Um, so when we started our website, I mean, there was even a TV commercial sometime around Christmas time that showed two guys sitting by their computer, and they just launched their website, and they're looking at the numbers: 1, 3, 10,
Right.
400, 2,000. That was me. I was there and I could not believe what was happening. And over the weeks and months, thousands, then tens of thousands. And then, and we did a great job with the website. Then, of course, everybody got involved, and everybody had websites. And then the competition for exposure and the competition for viewing was very high.
So when did you
So,
see that competition start to catch up?
I'm sorry.
When did you see that competition start to catch up? Do you have any sense how
Um,
many years?
it was probably in the early 2000s.
Okay.
Yeah, it didn't take long. The internet really exploded. And it was the early 2000s, maybe 2005, 2006.
Okay.
And it got fierce. It really did. So, what did you do? You had to do more, do bigger, do brighter, do canary yellow. I mean, you just had to explode yourself. And,
Right.
and it was a constant reinventing of yourself, and which I don't have a problem doing, but you had to be constantly aware
Right.
of what you were doing. So I picked out about 8 or 9 of my metal competitors, and I watched everything they did, on a very, very immediate framework.
Mm-hmm.
And I just improved on what I did and improved on what they did, and then of course they would do the same thing.
Right.
Um, the one thing that, and this is how Manufacturing Talk Radio came about. In 2013, I said, you know, everybody, we've been doing all this marketing, and we've been beating the death out of our competitors, and they beat us and we beat them back. Let's really do something that they don't know squat about.
All right. So that's a teaser. I want to cut you off there. We're going to come back to that, but let's go back. At the time you started to create your website, you were advertising in a big way in Thomas Register, obviously Yellow Pages, maybe some trade shows. Who were your primary customers, and what geography were you covering? Was it local to Metro New York, or was it international, or what?
It was international.
Okay.
It was international. And as far as the United States was concerned, I was in every directory, not Yellow Pages, but I was in every industrial directory.
Okay.
Aside from Thomas Register, I was in McRae's Blue Book, which is Canadian. I was in the purchasing managers directory, and then we went international, and we then had we hired on agents in Brazil, Israel, uh, Germany, France.
And how did you crack the code on directories? Because if you think, I mean, many people listening to this might not even know what the Green Thomas Register books looked like, how they, are on a shelf like law books or whatever. But if you think about the way companies listed in there, I mean, you had to pay for each category. And so people tried to figure out what category to be in, just
Yeah.
trying to understand how somebody might crack the book open and look for it. Did you just do a massive amount of experimentation, or did you have a consultant, or how did you crack the code to make those so effective?
Well, some of that goes back to my very first job when I was, 20, 21, 22 years old. My employer at that time was using Thomas Register. And to a very limited degree, he put his name in under aluminum. He
Right,
put his name in under steel.
right,
Well, the directories then started really developing the concept of keywords. So it wasn't just aluminum, it was aluminum bar, aluminum sheet, aluminum tube.
okay.
And then your particular expertise, that's where you would put yourself. So you really had to, in order to get the full benefit, you really had to commit some serious dollars. And at one point I would say it was again the early 2000s, I was spending $250,000 in Thomas Register alone.
So can we blame Thomas for one of the bankruptcies?
Uh, no,
No.
no. It was the economy, stupid, not you. No, the metals industry is purely and simply economy driven.
Right.
There was no. We went into a recession. And we were directly affected by that. And during one of those bankruptcies, that's when I started Fun Factory because I had not a lot to do. I said, I got to start another company. I can't just sit back and do nothing.
All right. So listening to the way you talk about your directory strategy, then I mean, it sounds like for you, moving to the internet was seamless because you were doing exactly the same thing. Some people thought of it as a completely different way of reaching out to the world. You saw it
Yeah.
as just a different directory in which you were optimizing around keywords.
Just moved the concept over.
Right.
Went from print to digital.
Got
Did
it.
the same thing. Again, keywords and all of that. I mean, at one point, I don't have it. We didn't have it now, but at one point we had like 3,000 keywords.
You actually had a lot more than that. I looked at some data, so I'll share a blast from the past with you in a minute.
Go ahead.
But backing up, you also got ISO certified.
Yes.
I think you did at the first level, and I'm not an ISO expert, but some level of certification 94, and then you became the first metal supplier to get an elevated tier in 1998. Talk
And the
about the
night.
genesis of that and the impact on your business.
Well, the ISO 9000 came about in the beginning of the 90s. And again, my feeling and my thoughts about our company, we had to do things that nobody was doing.
Right.
So I did the research. ISO, the International Standards Organization, is out of Geneva, Switzerland. And I did research with them directly. Uh, what's your game? What's this all about? And we got to do it. So we went for our ISO certification. It took us a year. We had to restructure our entire company because
Really.
what you had to do was that you had to document everything that you did for the customer.
Right.
And when you did something, when you wrote up an order, you had to write up the order same way, same time, same way, every time the same way.
Right.
So we had, I think it was 15 loose leaf books that contained all of the forms, the instructions, the methodology of what we had to do in terms of testing material. I mean, the truth be told, in the 80s and 70s, there were often times where test reports for raw materials were not the way they were supposed to be.
Right.
That's all I'll say about that. Well, now in the 2000s, I buy raw material. I receive test reports from the mill, or from the distributor that I bought the goods from. And over $1 a certain amount for a particular order, we would get a coupon, send it out for independent testing laboratory reports on every job over a certain dollar amount. So not only did we have the mill report, the test report from the distributor, I had my own report.
Okay.
And it would be interesting. I won't go into that, but it would be interesting how different sometimes my reports were than the reports that I received from others. So the following 4 years, and by the way, all of my salespeople and the people in the company at the time, why do we have to do this? Why do we have to be dictated to by a foreign country, Switzerland?
Right.
And I said, because this is the way the future is going. We're going to do it. You're going to love it. The day that we got in the mail our certification, the certificate that says you are ISO, one of the salespeople got a phone call from a customer, never heard from him before, said, listen, I need to buy X, Y, and Z, but I got a problem. I have to buy it from an ISO certified company. Well, the price just went up. So the first day we had the first order from a new customer at a excessive price structure, and I didn't have to sell this anymore to my salespeople.
And you
They
paid for the
bought it.
certification process.
They got it.
Right.
4 years later, the United States aerospace industry caught on to this. And they said, you know what? Because we're so vital and we're so important and there's so much, life and death issues regarding our product, we need to have our own version of ISO. So they came out with AS 9000,
Okay.
Aerospace Specification 9000. Immediately, I called our contact. I went to AS 9000. 80% of what we already did with ISO was already in AS. So it was within 2 months we had that certification. And we were the first metal company in the United States that had an aerospace specification, which of course helped sales significantly.
So great anecdote about that first day, but can you quantify what the impact was on your business over time of you having that prescience to get those certifications?
You mean how many extra dollars in millions it brought us?
Yeah.
Millions. It was multi millions. And I was looking for the third certification process to come out, but it never happened.
Was your team, did you train them in how to use that proactively to sell, or was it kind of a passive thing?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
Did you train your team in how to proactively sell around your certification, or was it just passive? If somebody asked about it, you'd say, yes, we can do it.
Oh, by that time, we didn't have to promote it. I mean, we had put it in all of our advertising and so on and so forth. But every major company, aerospace companies, defense companies, they all sucked up right to it. Said, if you're not, matter of fact, selling the DoD, Department of Defense, if you weren't ISO and you weren't AS, you couldn't sell them. Or any of their subcontractors, like Boeing, like General Electric jet engines, like Lockheed Martin. You couldn't sell them unless you had it. So, and we had it first. So it took probably a good 2 years, in some cases 3 years, for other major companies to buy into this. First of all, small companies or smaller to mid-sized companies really had a serious problem because it was expensive.
Right.
Now, part of the certification is that you have to get recertified every 3 years. You get a modified audit every year. Every 3 years, they re-audited your entire company. And that included forms. It included talking with your people. They wanted to see your training program. They documented everything. They looked at every hole and cranny. They would go to your filing cabinet of closed orders and pull out an order. Okay, let's go over this order page by page.
Right.
And these audits took 2 and 3 days.
Right.
So again, it was time consuming, expensive, and smaller companies really had a hard time buying into it. So it was
Right.
more of a medium to large until enough of these auditing companies said, look, if we want to have this go broad stream, we have to make it simpler and less expensive. So they came up with ways to do the auditing process where the smaller companies were able to buy in.
Right. Thinking back to the mid 90s, what was more important to growing a business, sales or marketing?
Well, marketing.
Okay. Even in the mid 90s?
Yeah, marketing. Marketing brought sales. It
Okay.
wasn't the other way around.
Did you ever see it the other way around, either before or after, or do you believe it's always been
Well,
marketing?
yeah, back in the 70s and 80s, it was sales. I mean, the first time I went bankrupt was 1978. It was during a recession, so you couldn't do sales because there wasn't any, and you couldn't really do marketing because marketing was going to bring sales, but there was no sales because we were in a recession.
Right.
So we wound up struggling through that recessionary period, and came the 1984, things opened up.
Right.
It was like a miracle. And then I went back to broadstream marketing, which brought sales,
Got
and
it.
so on and so forth.
And by 2010, I'm assuming that your website, the internet, was your most effective marketing channel. Is that a fair assumption?
Oh yeah,
Do you have
absolutely.
any recollection of how many leads you were generating a week from the web or a month?
Oh, yeah, we were getting between 500 and 1,000 leads a month,
Wow.
and these were pretty much qualified,
Really?
because the way we promoted lead generation was that they had to give us a lot of the information about what their need was.
Right.
So he really needs it. He has an AS requirement. He's got an IS requirement. All right, the price just went up.
Right.
Um, um, are you a regular supplier of an aircraft company? And they would give us all this information, and most of the metal companies didn't do that. What they did was they wanted to send us the inquiry, you know, alloy, spec, size, shape, quantity.
Right.
We went a lot deeper.
Hmm.
We went a lot deeper. And matter of fact, to this day, I know they're still using that process the way it is.
So, as I said, I did some research, and I don't know if you changed your website domain URL along the way, but for steelforge.com, in December 2019, you peaked at 73,000 visits that month, and
Say
you
that
were
again?
73,000 visits in December 2019, and you were ranking for 19,000 keywords. That
I'm
didn't ha-
impressed.
that
I'm impressed.
well, it is impressive, particularly for an
I got to
industrial.
write that down. I didn't remember that.
Yeah.
73,000 visits, huh?
Yep, and 19,000 keywords. But that didn't happen all of a sudden.
No, no, no.
And what I saw was that you did it for a long time, but really in October of I'm spacing out the year. I think it was October 2013. It really started to grow,
To
and
what?
so I think that brings us to Manufacturing Talk Radio.
Yes, yes.
Um, Somehow you got this bee in your bonnet in 2013, and you started Manufacturing Talk Radio. So you gave us the context that you always wanted to look to do something different. But did you get out of bed one morning and have that brainstorm, or how did that come about?
Um, okay. We have to go further back in
Okay.
time. I'm from the era of radio,
Okay.
and I used to love listening to talk radio. And my two favorite characters, well, there was three actually. One was Barry Gray on WMCA New York, and he had an 11 o'clock p.m. talk show for an hour. Then there was Long John Neville. I don't know if you even know these names.
I don't.
And, and then there was the Nightbird. And the Nightbird was a woman. Right now I can't remember her name, but she would come on at midnight. And I was a kid, and I used to have a little transistor radio, and I used to put it under my pillow, and I would listen to it all night. My parents never knew, but that was the beginning. I was a kid. I loved radio, and when in 2013 came about, I said, you know what? Our marketing is getting stale. The competition is right up our butt. And what are we going to do? And forgive me with the telephone.
That's fine.
So when we went to, I went to some conference, and somebody was doing like a radio show hookup, and you look like you got right now. You're a real radio jockey. And I saw that at a expo, and I said, "That's it. That's what we're doing." And that was thought number one. Thought number two was, okay, the concept of the radio show has to be about manufacturing to draw traffic to our metal company. And it worked like a charm.
Did you ever do an episode about metal?
No.
I didn't think you did. And this, I think, fundamentally is the point. If people take nothing away from this, you had a metal company, you were marketing for a metal company, you started this podcast / radio show, and you never, ever once did an episode about metal.
No, never did. What the theme was for, okay, let me go backwards a little bit. So the theme was to talk to people about manufacturing who are in manufacturing, to talk on the air to people who are in manufacturing. All right, what are we going to talk about? So what we started doing was, and what we found out, excuse me, what we found out really early on, 4, maybe 5 months after we started, which was in November of 2013, was that manufacturers, they really know their stuff.
Right.
They know how to make. They know how to make stuff. They know how to market it. They know what they're doing. But there's a lot they don't know.
Right.
And what they don't know is how to improve their processes within the company, because they've been doing this way for 30 years.
Right.
Well, maybe they could do it this way. And maybe this way is cheaper and more efficient and more consistent with less people, less time. So we started talking to people not about metals, but we started talking about how to run your business better, how to analyze. And we had a lot of shows that talked about the economy. For example, the Institute of Supply Management, the ISM. They were my very first show. They were on my show every month without fail from November 2013 to December 2024.
Wow.
Every month, religiously. And we talked about what happened in the economy last month, what happened in logistics, what happened with new orders. These are all very important things that they don't have the time, knowledge base, and so on to, how do I find out about what's going on?
Right.
All I know is I got less orders last month, or I got more orders last month. Well, how's the economy doing? I don't know. You can't hear about it on the news because no one in the news ever talked about manufacturing.
Right.
So that's what we learned in the first 2 quarters of Manufacturing Talk Radio, is that these people, they know their stuff, they know how to do it, but they're missing out on a lot of good stuff to help grow their business, maintain the business, and so on.
All right. So 2 key insights there. Number one, people want to learn about a broad range of topics related to their industry, to their job, to their company, to their process, the stuff that's going to help them improve. And they may not know up front that some particular insight is going to be meaningful, but they listen to it they chew over it, they think about it when they're stuck in traffic, and suddenly they have a eureka moment. Sometimes they hear it and it doesn't mean anything to them, and that's okay. The other thing that jumps out at me about that, just like you said, they know their stuff really well, but not necessarily other parts of it. That's the hang up that a lot of companies have when it comes to doing something like what you did, because the answer is, oh, well, we're not qualified to do that. We know this part really well, but that's all we know. And what you demonstrated is you just go out and you build a faculty. You find people who know about all these different things and who bring that expertise, and you give them a platform and you facilitate the conversation in case they have those pocket protectors and they don't know how to talk, and you make it easy for them to talk. But that's what people yearn for, is that ability to learn across a broad range of topics, and you tapped into that.
I put Manufacturing Talk Radio on what I call Pod Pause in December of 2024. I just sold All Metals and Forge, and the transitioning from selling the business and so on, it was just too complex for me to handle both and do a show every week and so on.
Right.
So I put it on pause. And the 4 or 5 months prior to putting it on pause, in other words, August, September till December of 2024, we were having between 80 and 100,000 downloads a month.
Wow.
That would be 4 or 5 shows. Sometimes we did specials.
Right.
And 80 to 100,000 people. I mean, I remember going back to the day that I'm sitting in front of the computer and it was going 1,
Yep.
2, 100. Now we're talking about tens of thousands. It was
But the
astonishing.
fascinating thing is, I'm sure those downloads grew very, very gradually. However, the impact of that show on your website traffic and keyword rankings was almost instantaneous. And it's fascinating to see that impact. Did you have specific goals and objectives? You started out, it was a good idea. This is what we got to do. It had this romantic echo for you from the early radio days. But did you have a vision for how it was going to help your business?
I had hopes and dreams.
Okay.
I did not have concept and financial spin on what this meant.
So how did you measure impact besides downloads?
How did it make an impact?
How did you measure? How did you know if it was worth you continuing to spend time doing it?
Well, the sales at All Metals and Forge Group over a period, not too long of a period, went up by over 30%.
Wow.
And, we're talking about multi-millions. It made a significant difference. Did it double? No, I didn't need to double, but let me tell you, 30% is a lot of money. And that, I was astonished at first. And then I said, well, let's keep going. And
did you ever find yourself like on a Sunday night saying, holy shit, I got a really busy week. I don't have time to do the show this week. Did you ever question whether you should keep doing it?
No.
No?
No. One of the things and you know this, one of the things about podcast is consistency.
Right.
If you're going to do a weekly show on Tuesday at 11 o'clock in the morning, you got to do that every week.
Right.
And I think the classic example of that is we had a guest on from Engel Shipyard down in Alabama or some place down there. My co-host, Tim Grady, was in Atlanta. He worked there, he lived there. I was at a manufacturing expo in Rio de Janeiro, and we did a show. I walked out of the expo, out of the conference. I held my iPad. I'm outside. We did our show. We maintained our show at roughly 30 minutes. And we found that was a good number. You can, if you don't BS too much nonsense, you can get a lot of information out. And that was probably the most extreme. I was in a different continent and Alabama, and Georgia and Rio, and
Right.
it wouldn't be the first time. And actually, we went to several conferences where we set up a radio studio on the conference floor, and we would do between 75 and 100 interviews in 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, there's a number of those on the YouTube channel, and looking at YouTube, you've got one 5G episode that had 25,000 views. Um, but at what point did you start out doing video and audio, or was it just audio originally?
No, no, it started out as audio only.
Okay.
And I felt it was dry. It didn't let our characters come out. Uh, Wearing a yellow jacket on audio just didn't do it for me. And it was probably, excuse me, it was probably 2 years before we said, you know what? And we started seeing people doing audio and so on. And now we got to flip this. Wow, but it's going to be so much more involved and so much more expensive and so on. Yeah, but people are going to like seeing us, and
Right.
people like television. If there was radio, and then of course there was television. Of course, it took an extra 100 years
Right.
to get from point A to point B. It only took us 2 years.
So you had video on your website, the MTR website. You had video on YouTube. You had video on Rumble, and you actually found over the years some interesting differences in the engagement you got across different platforms.
Yes, there was certain. One of the things that we never did or rarely did was talk politics.
Right. And we won't here either.
No, we won't. I think people used to say, "Well, we know your politics." How do you know my? Well, we could tell. So I guess I was kind of clear as to where I stood, but we never talked about it. Now, matter of fact, talking about that, and we're about ready to relaunch. We're doing our we're coming back campaign. Actually, we have can I tell you a little prelude to our first show?
Absolutely.
Okay, I went to a Broadway show a couple months ago, and there was a gal there who was doing a one-woman show about Betty Davis, and she looked like Betty Davis. And she was, in her 30s, but she looked like Betty Davis. She was spicy like Betty Davis. She was attractive and so on. So she did this one woman show about Betty Davis. Now, Betty Davis, I don't know how many people know this about her. She was an icon for women's rights, actors' rights, equal pay, and so on and so forth. And Hollywood was notorious for underpaying women actors and actresses. She fought that. And so when I went to the show, I said, and I called her Betty Davis. Her name was Jessica Scher. I said, Betty, I'm making a comeback, and we're doing manufacturing talk radio. I want you to be on our first show. What am I going to talk about? I said, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. So we did it. We did it 2 weeks ago, and it's being edited right now.
So you
and
filmed it on stage in the theater with her.
We did it in the theater, on stage, lights, cameras,
fireside conversation kind of a thing.
That's going to be our first comeback show. And we talked to her about the way it was in the 20s and 30s.
Got it.
For women, that it was hard then, and yada yada yada, and it was great. It's only a 20-minute segment, but it's great. I can't wait to see it.
And then at some point you syndicated onto the radio as well, right?
We did. We did a syndication. We were on a radio station in Chicago, and which was the second one. The first one we did was upstate New York. And what we did was we did the Institute of Supply Management program on I think a Tuesday at 5 o'clock in the evening when people were driving home.
Mm-hmm.
And we did that show. We did it 3 or 4 months. And the stats were greater than the population of the city that we did it in.
Wow.
It was amazing, but it did get expensive, and we weren't making a lot of money at what we're doing, so we did put it on pause. But we are likely to make a comeback on AM/FM radio.
So a friend of mine, who I've also interviewed for this podcast, Jim Blassingame, has kind of a similar sort of a story with an epiphany. He started broadcasting. It was syndicated. He started doing video. He built this incredible library of experts and following, and it's interesting. Who's the British guy that writes about innovation? He wrote the book Idea Sex. Matt Ridley. He makes the point that if you look at history, there are people that arrive at the same innovation at the same time, knowing nothing about each other. That there's just a certain time that society and mankind and the environment reaches the point where bright people that are creative figure it out simultaneously. So it's neat talking with a couple different folks that had this path and just kind of ended up there independently.
That's neat. I have his information, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Absolutely. So throughout all this, never an episode about metal. You were never pimping All Metals and Forge Group. You just kind of had a simple tagline that Manufacturing Talk Radio was sponsored by All Metals and Forge Group, and that was all of the branding associated with it, right?
That was it.
What resources did you turn to learn about how to do this? You said you were walking through this trade show and you saw somebody doing it, but did you go research it somewhere? Did you have a consultant? How did you get started?
Once I realized that that we're in deep water here, and I could either research this on my own slowly, or I have to reach out to people who say they know what they're doing. So I then reached out to, matter of fact, his name is Bruce Clay. He's out on the West Coast. He's considered, at least self-considered, the father of the internet.
Really?
In terms of marketing and so on. A bright guy. A professor and so on. And I reached out to him, and I went out there. I got on a plane, got on a big bird, and spent several days with him. I did other experts in the field, and I learned through other people who took the shortcut by doing all the research themselves, then building their own businesses to become consultants to help people like me who don't know what we're doing.
And you talked about how you watched your competitors' websites and extracted insights from that. Were you watching other podcasts and getting ideas from them?
Oh yeah, I'm still doing that.
Okay.
I'm not going to name names, but yes, I do that religiously.
And so basically, you had some experts advising you. You had your kind of flowery personality. You had your Dr. Johnny Fever DJ voice, and it all just happened from there.
Yeah.
So I know there's a couple different formats. Most of your shows were a three-way conversation done over Zoom. You had Tim, your co-host, yourself, and a guest. Some were interviews at trade shows. What other formats did you try along the way?
We did go to some on-site manufacturing companies, and we did a walkthrough. We found that that was great for the manufacturing company, but it really wasn't great in terms of getting information and giving it to the audience.
Right.
So we pretty much ruled that out after a while. The trade shows were great. I would have the president of ISM. I'd have the president of FEMA. I had the president of the FMA, the American Gear Manufacturing Association, and people hearing these experts,
right.
The presidents of major organizations throughout the manufacturing world, was really very satisfying in terms of the amount of information and value information.
Scott McKenzie does a lot of that. Do you know Scott?
I'm sorry.
Scott McKenzie does a lot of that. Do you know him?
Yes, I do. I was went out and visited him. Also, he was one of my targets.
Okay.
I went to NAM, the National Association of Manufacturers. We had Jay Timmons on the show a couple of times.
Right.
Matter of fact, I'm going to DC next week, and I'm hoping to get an appointment with him.
Mm-hmm.
Bright guy. I mean, he does a fantastic job with the NAM.
Right.
Um,
All right, let's talk about monetizing. For many years, you monetized this by virtue of the business benefit that you got through all metals and forge, but you also had reached a point where you really wanted to monetize it as a standalone entity. I think you put that on hold as you were doing your business transaction. Um, and the plan now, as you relaunch, if I understand correctly, is to try to monetize. Talk about your
yes.
thinking around that.
Well, monetization in the podcast world, and you know this, is not easy.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's not going to make you millions. You're lucky if you can get it to pay your bills. Um, I'm doing this. I'm looking to do this for the next 2 3 years, and then uh, blow it off to my next in line. Um, but I need to get it to the point where it is generating revenue.
Right.
If it doesn't generate revenue within a reasonable length of time going forward, in spite of my attitude about being a value to the manufacturing industry by bringing information to them, I can only afford to do that for so long without monetization.
Sure.
So that's sort of where I'm at. And you're right. When I was doing the All Metals and Forge Group, um, they received the benefit
Right.
of additional sales, and they paid the bills.
Right.
So I don't have that now, and again, I do have a concept on what I'm going to be doing going forward, at least for the next year or two.
Mm-hmm.
But monetization is key.
So we'll talk a little bit more in a moment about who might reach out to you if they're interested in leveraging that platform. But let's talk about your transaction. Um, a lot of people work for a lot of years. Suddenly, there's a transaction. They've anticipated what it was going to be like, and it catches them by surprise. Were there things about the transaction that startled you, or had you prepared yourself to know how that was going to go?
I've probably been hit with more surprises over the last couple of years, and I'm sure that you have too. You were not always a radio jockey yourself, and you're doing your consulting business, which I'm sure is what pays the bulk of your bills,
Right.
or at least I hope so. Otherwise, are we going to make it to the end of the show, or is somebody going to cut the line? um, no, the what I need to do, I'm looking for the right kind of advertisers that can appreciate the fact that I was doing 100,000 downloads, 100,000 people a month. Uh, Ostensibly, I'm looking at 200,000, 300,000 going down the road.
Right.
Companies like Granger, they would be perfect. They would be perfect. Um, Having the orgs do advertising. They always say they don't have money, but they just rope in that membership fees
Right.
left, right, and the center. So it's going to be the larger corporations that I believe would receive benefit by just exposure.
Well,
They're
certainly
not good.
your fancy president emeritus title ought to give you gravitas to reach out to them.
That was that didn't come easy.
No?
No, there was some heavy discussions about that. So I just did what I wanted.
Got it. Through the years, you've had the financial stress, bankruptcies, business up, business down, managing a huge workload. Any insights on how you manage the work stress in conjunction with the show? I mean, did you exercise? How did you do it?
drank a lot.
What's your favorite
only,
flavor?
only kidding. Um, I think it's because I really loved what I was doing. I mean, I could sum it up with that. I mean, I would work, and when All Metals and Forge Group, I worked 6 days a week.
Right.
I'd be in at 7:30 in the morning, and I'd be there till 6, 7 o'clock at night. I did that, for 5 decades. Um, and then 5 decades, then I decided, I had this wild, hairy idea about doing a radio show, which I just incorporated into the All Metals, built a studio in our offices and brought in cameras and lights and egg egg crates on the ceiling. And
Right.
I mean, we did all the things that we had to do. And I just was excited to do that. And then one part of our bit, the all metals part, was that we made relations with companies overseas. And so I was traveling a lot overseas, visiting vendors, mostly vendors, um, on top of running the company, on top of manufacturing talk radio. And my wife is very supportive of all that, um, almost to a fault. But she's not in the studio, so I can say these things. I may not tell her I just did this, or she won't hear it. Um, Stress, yeah, there was stress. Listen, bankruptcy is not fun.
Right.
Even when you have a plan and you know how you're going to get out of this mess, um, I always knew that recessions come and recessions go. I just got to be able to survive it,
Right.
cut back, chop what you have to do, and stick to the guns. And yeah, I did my share of going to the gyms and swimming and all of that stuff. Um, where my Valhalla is Cape Cod, Massachusetts. My wife and I go there 4, 5, 6 times a year,
Wow.
and we just chill out,
Nice.
sleep 10, 12 hours a day, eat, drink, socialize with our friends up there.
Nice.
Um,
So
that
at its peak, how many hours a week were you spending on your show?
on the show.
Yeah.
Uh, when you say show, are you including research and so on and so forth?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, Probably 20, 25.
Really substantial amount of time. And there was business benefit to it. Did you learn anything in running your show that improved your effectiveness at running your business?
Yeah, sure.
Like what?
Absolutely. All the things that I was saying that the manufacturer didn't know that they should be doing for their business, I was there with them.
Got it.
I mean, we instituted software programs within the metal company that helped our company. Yeah, no question about it. I was learning it first, then I was repackaging it and then feeding it to the manufacturing world.
So it built the discipline of you researching all these other areas to make you more effective in business.
Yes, absolutely. To this day.
And how about controversial topics? We agreed we won't talk about politics, but some things like women's wage gap or tariffs
When
or
what?
women's wage gap or tariffs or things like that, those apply in the manufacturing space. Some might consider them controversial. Did you embrace any of those kinds of topics?
Well, yes, tariff became an issue when it first became an issue.
Okay.
It's only now gotten absurdly worse. And forgetting, and I think the worst part about the tariff issue wasn't that it was political, but it was those in the government that was trying to feed the people in the population about how tariffs worked lied. They directly lied. They said things like China is going to pay $3 billion in tariffs to the United States. The United States is going to get rich. And people ate up that lemonade, and it was a lie. And only recently did I see a whole article, an editorial, that explained that it was a lie and explained, and I think now people have a better understanding that they are paying for the tariff.
But you didn't hesitate to embrace a topic like that on the show and
No,
have a conversation that might annoy some people.
oh yeah, I got some nasty grams and stuff like that. But, you know, either I'm telling the truth or I'm telling the truth.
So
And
speaking of telling the truth, you talked about reshoring with Harry Moser, I'd say long before it was a big thing.
oh yeah, and matter of fact, I'm going to see him Monday in Sarasota. Yeah, Harry and I, we gave him kind of his own show title. Everybody loves Harry,
Right.
with the theme song. Everybody loves Harry. Um, yeah, Harry's done really an amazing job getting that topic out, up in front.
Right.
And we helped him to whatever degree that we did, and he's a good guy.
All right. So if there's an industrial manufacturer or distributor out there that's intrigued listening to you, thinking about a podcast or maybe some kind of a video show, number one, are they too late? And number two, if they're not too late, what's your advice to them?
Well, I don't think it's ever too late. I think there's only 4 million podcasts.
And if you had said at the point there was 4 million websites, if you had said, "Oh, I missed an opportunity," imagine how silly that would
there
have been.
was that time. Yes, there's something like 4 million podcasts now, but only less than 10% of them make it to the 10th episode.
Right.
Most of them put it on pause and never look back and just end it.
You're actually going to be number 52 for the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. So you're our anniversary episode.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And this show is going to be my 851st on my podcast.
Wow.
Yeah, we have over 800, close to 850. It's a lot of work, a lot of time and effort. But I never look back.
So lessons for somebody who's thinking about trying to replicate what you've done.
I would think, it depends on what their industry is, because if you're looking to go broad base, you want to tell the world about you, or do you want to tell the gear manufacturing industry about you?
Okay.
It's a big difference.
Right.
Going after this market versus that market.
Right.
So it depends on what your product is. It depends greatly what your product is and what your market size is that you're going after. So I would say if you have the drive to do it and you have the extra 20 hours a week that you'd like to throw at this, I would say do it, because you'd be surprised and shocked at some of the feedback that you get about yourself, about your show, about your company. It's really been rewarding.
But how long should somebody plan on hanging in there? I mean, you started in 2013, and it really started to show up in your numbers in 2019.
Right.
How long should somebody be patient? Should they expect to do it for 2 years or what?
I think 2 years is a relatively reasonable time. Don't forget, when I did it in 13, there was not a lot of people out there doing something like this.
Right.
So it took a while from 13 to 19 to get the engine going and get up the hill. Sometimes I view myself as Sisyphus. And actually, I have a sculpture on my living room cocktail table of a bronze Sisyphus pushing his rock up the hill. And I look at that and I said, there I am, pushing that rock.
Well, and I think along the way, you've done a couple things that might not have been the way I would have recommended. You've changed the URL a couple times. You've changed the format of stuff. I think you've pulled it off of certain channels and put it back up in different formats. And so, I mean, there have been some times you've absolutely had to kind of crawl back to recover some of the traffic that you had originally generated.
Yeah. It's true.
What resources would you recommend for that industrial manufacturing company CEO intrigued by it, thinking maybe I could someday be like Lew? I'm willing to put 2 years in. I'm willing to put the time in. Where do you recommend they go besides watching other shows?
You mean to get help?
To get information, to get help, to get advice?
Oh, I think I think that the best way, in my opinion, is in the beginning stay away from consultants. All right,
No,
sorry,
I
but
didn't pay you to come on and say that.
you didn't pay me. No, I'm serious. So I think that you need to do the first round of research on your own. Does this make sense to you? Does that make sense to you? Then, and in doing that research, you will run across the right people. You're one of the right people.
Thank you.
And I feel very comfortable in talking to you here or off camera, one on one, and maybe we're going to do some of that shortly. But I think you need to, in order for you to have a better understanding, you have to know the buzzwords. You have to understand a little bit more. When I went to see Bruce Clay out in California, who's really a giant of a guy in this industry, I studied every screen of his website. I read every one of his white papers. I'm still flying out there and I've got a stack of his white papers. I want to know and understand a lot
Right.
before I sit down and talk to the guy.
Right.
So I don't think it's too late. I think, the 4 million podcasts and only 10% of them make it to the 10th episode is significant. And you have to be prepared and say, gee, do I have the wherewithal to be able to get past the 10th episode?
Right.
Am I willing to put all that in? Am I willing to pony up the investment money, open a studio? You're going to do this, you got to do it right.
Right.
So
All
you
right.
got to get.
If folks want to reach you either as possible advertisers or sponsors, or maybe as guests if they think they've got something unique, or as students of your expertise, how do they connect with you? How do they reach you?
Lew Weiss at mfgtalkradio.com.
Got it. All right, and I'll put that in the show notes. When's
and
your
I'll
website going to
respond,
be back live again?
and I'll respond to anybody who communicates,
Thank you. When will your
as long
website
as
be?
it's less than 100,000.
When will your website be live again?
It's well, we've changed the launch date now 3 times. We got to do this. Oh, we got to do that. It's going to be with one. We have a landing page which has information, and we'll have that data on it.
Okay.
And that's mfgtalkradio.com. You can
Okay.
go there. You can see what we're doing, and it will have our actual launch date. We're looking at sometime mid-March.
Okay.
Or April.
All right. So wrap us up, Lew. You've got 50 years of wisdom, 60 years of wisdom in industrial sales, a decade of wisdom from media. Give us 3 minutes on what you believe about industrial marketing, how media connects with it, how it helps build the market, and most importantly, what buyers want these days.
3 minutes, huh?
3 minutes. I'll give you 3.5 if it helps.
And I think I've already said it to a degree, if you have the commitment and the drive, make sure you also have the investment funds to do this. The rewards, whether the rewards come as a result of all of your input and your knowledge and your training and your research, or if you have taken all that and then hired on the best that you can in terms of consulting companies and so on, the rewards will come back in spades. And it has done that for me. To the point that I have removed the R word from the English language because I'm never retiring. And so here it is, 80 plus, and I'm going full steam ahead.
And how about this fundamental difference in the way many industrial companies look at the world? You didn't talk about what you did. You didn't talk about what you made. You didn't talk about what you sold. You talked about what buyers and listeners and the audience were interested in.
Yeah.
How do companies get over that hurdle and actually start to think like they're buyers?
Well, are you talking about in terms of a podcast?
In terms of a podcast, but if they can get their mindset right that way, then it also applies to their one pagers and to their website and to everything else.
You, one of the things, and this is very, I think this is very important. Educating your buyer is of colossal importance. And at one time, back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, buyers, they knew everything. You know, don't tell me shit about that. I know, I have, blah, blah. Well, but the world has changed. And the world is not only changed, it changed since 1 hour ago when we both got on this show. And maybe you and I are actually part of that change as we're sitting here talking about what we think we know about.
Right.
I think that what I have adopted is to help educate the customer, help educate the buyer, help educate the CEO, help him with his business. And that's what we really have done. And, 850 shows kind of tells that whole story.
Right.
And, I'm looking at the next 100 shows.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Lew, for your energy.
Thanks for having me on.
And your pathfinding work, and particularly your insights today.
I appreciate the opportunity, and I wish people would stop calling me.
No, you don't wish people to stop calling
no,
you.
your listeners, you can call me. You can call me.
All right, for everyone listening, what a tour de force. Please be sure to like, share, and comment. Maybe bookmark or save this, because I'm pretty sure that when you see what's happening to your digital marketing metrics over the course of the next year or two, you're going to be coming back to this episode and thinking, I probably should have done it then. I better get going on it now. As the Chinese saying goes, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So,
I have an expression: either do it then or do it now. But one way or another, you're going to do it.
Exactly. Thank you
So
so
it
much,
may as
Lew.
well be now.
Thanks for joining me.
You bet. Thank you.
For everyone listening, be sure to subscribe. And thanks again for joining me and Lew for this episode of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast.